Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Let's Fix Stories, the podcast where we take a look at your stories and help you get them in fighting shape. Whether it's a first draft, whether you're ready to send it off to a publisher, or it's just a few chapters that you want to make sure you're on the right track. We're here to help you tune that up. And today we are going to not just build someone else's. We're going to walk the talk by putting one of our own team members' stories on. I'm not going to call it the chopping block because I feel like that's a little
Up on the ceremonial altar.
yeah. Yeah, we're gonna put it on. We're gonna put it on a platform today, and we're gonna look at it right in the eye and talk about all of the things that are right and wrong. No, there's nothing wrong in stories. Let's get that right. They're just stuff that could be tweaked. Well, there's some stuff that's wrong in stories, but
intro. I think the only thing that can be wrong, all joking aside, is when you're Ayn Rand. We all know how I feel about Ayn Rand, and your first day in hell lasts for 1,000 years, and maybe your shorts. But the point being is, it was just ranting, just rambling for her own personal psychotic. The Native Americans dying was a good thing. Look it up. It's a real speech she made. Moving on, but
wow, okay.
That's psychotic.
Dang. Okay.
But I think she was evil. But I think, people will always used to go, like, if you remember, like, when The Last Jedi came out, people said, blank is objectively bad. This is objectively bad. Things I think are bad. They don't work for you. Or they can be tighter or stronger, more polished. Nothing is, like, inherently... You're not killing children here, writers. Despite what the dude bros will tell you. The worst superhero movie you watch is not killing children. It just doesn't work. Not that it's inherently wrong.
Mm.
So,
Gotcha.
that's my
Good
soapbox
point.
there.
Good point.
So, today we are talking about Charles. Charles's short story, Caution Kids on the Road. Caution Kids on the Road follows a group of teenagers playing a dangerous game of chicken with passing cars, except the game is not just a game, at least not to me. And so,
That was so weird that you just described what I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago in like this professional way. I was like, the what? That was weird. I apologize. I don't mean to get off track. That was just very, very weird. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
So, I'm just getting started. So, I will say, first things first, I think the best way to do this is first, Charles, let's ask some questions to you about your story. How did the story come about, and what was the idea behind it? What was your goal with it? Those are the questions I would have starting out.
I can't remember if I wrote this in 2020 or 21. I want to say, if it was 20, it was definitely late in 2020. But it was during the pandemic, but specifically it was about, I would walk around where I lived at the time. And I live in Georgia, by the way, or I was exiled to Georgia when I was 13, and I've been stuck here ever since. And the place is horrible, the state is horrible, and I don't care, you can crucify me, I don't care, I'll be gladly crucified for that. But, specifically, there are no sidewalks in this godforsaken place. You have to drive everywhere. Why don't you just bike? You can't bike anywhere. You gotta drive everywhere. And so, literally, walking around, you couldn't just go outside and walk. You always have to keep an eye on everything and make sure you don't get hit. There's like a very thin bike lane, but that's not going to help you. And it was really it was frustrating. But during the pandemic, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. And that's what I did. I walked around. I think, yes, I listened to an audiobook of the ending, or the middle, I should say, of the Two Towers, the Lord of the Rings, the whole Battle of Helm's Deep. I listened to an audiobook as I was walking around and keeping an eye on cars because everything was just so trapped. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the cars and stuff, and I was like, well, who really runs the road? Because I was like, if I stood in the middle of the road, no one's going to do anything because they can't hit me because you can't. Unless you're crazy, unless you're not paying attention, I own the street. I own the road because no one wants to go to prison. No one wants to go, oh, I hate someone. And at the time, too, though, because of the pandemic, because basically at the time my life was really, really hard. Like it was still difficult, but things were getting not better, but they were progressing. And then the pandemic came around, and everything just turned to ash. All the plans turned to ash. And now, we're 4 or 5 years later, things are different. But I remember thinking at the time, nothing existed. There was no future. It was just every day, month. But I was thinking, as in, honestly, I've been feeling that a lot more. The sense of there is no future, there is no thing to do. And that's what started to develop it of like, what if you turned a game of chicken into that sense of I have to control something. Something has to be controlled. At the time, too, I was still very much dealing with driving anxiety, pretty much, because I got my license. I passed 100 on my license test, by the way. 100. That calls for a dab. That's right, everyone. I just dabbed on
Much better
podcast.
than me. I was convinced I was not going to get handed my license when they listed off everything I did wrong.
Oh my
I
gosh.
have no license. Oh.
Okay, there you go.
So.
But then what happened was, and I drove really, really well. I drove really well. But there was one time, a really bad stuff was going down. Really bad stuff was going on in my life, and I almost got in an accident. And it would have been my fault. And I got pulled over by this cop, and I just kind of lost it, and I felt I couldn't drive. And from then on, during this time, I had this real paranoia about driving. And so it all kind of combined into the sense of there's no future for me. The pandemic made sure I didn't have a future, but I didn't really have a future anyway. And I really was getting really angry at cars. I got jealous and angry that everyone could just go, yeah, I'm just going to go to Atlanta, man, these tight little streets and just kind of park. And I got really frustrated with that sense of jealousy and what I couldn't have. And so I wanted to try to do one of these literary short stories, and that's why I brought up the John Updike's A&P, because I hate that short story. I don't care if whoever kills me. It was a bad story. I don't like it. But I wanted to try my hand at those kinds of literary stories, because usually I hadn't done that. It was just kind of sci-fi, fantasy, weird stuff, which is a shame, because I love dramas. I love dramas a lot. We'll get into that for the next podcast, not this one, the other one. But I wanted to kind of explore that of what is a Charles Rodriguez version of the literary short story they assigned you in high school or college. So I think that was all that kind of blended together and things about my world and my life at the time to become this.
Gotcha.
I hope that didn't sound pretentious. I've never done that before.
No,
That was beautiful.
No, not to me. Okay. So, first things first, I'm going to ask Jaylon, what did you think about the story? What jumped out at you? Yeah, let's start with that. What jumped out at you?
It jumped out at me that it was written from a very real place, which obviously it shined through Charles, so amazing job there. I felt like I was stuck in that mind space along with the main character. It started bringing up the existential thoughts that I had when I was graduating high school, but I was convinced that I was going to be stuck, basically taking care of my chronically ill mom for the rest of my life. So those kinds of feelings, even though it was a different scenario, it accessed those real feelings that I think everyone deals with at that very tender age, even when there's no world pandemic going on. So the fact that it was written from a very real place hit me. Sorry. The fact that I could get in the headspace with the confusing train of thought. It seemed random, the ramblings, but it really immersed me in the story, so I appreciated the literary style of that. It worked for this story. And there was something else. I would say that the theme of the story that jumped out to me was, can we tempt fate enough to change it? So those are my off the top of my head observations, my first thoughts that I had when I first read it.
Gotcha. Okay. And okay, so for myself, I would say what I loved about this story was I loved the raw nature of it. It felt real to me. These people felt real. I related to it. I also really, really liked the idea of the contrast between a child. I mean, Chicken is not exactly a children's game, but in essence, it's a game nonetheless. And I like the contrast of a game being played out contrasting against an existential crisis. Because it's games are meant to be fun and enjoyable and light, and existentialism is anything but. And so I love that there was that balance. I also agreed that the theme was fantastic. Some of the themes were fantastic. Now I had several different views on it. Now I took notes, so if I'm reading from it, I apologize. It's just I had a lot to say about a lot of this stuff. So the first thing that I know is that I felt like this story was really, really about youth versus adulthood, and fate and identity. The cars to me weren't just obstacles, or they were basically a representation of the future barreling down the road, whether these kids were ready for it or not. And I kind of feel like that's how life works, right? And you're not always going to be ready for the future, especially as a teenager. That's the last thing in the world is you're trying to figure out what's coming. I think the pandemic, as the backdrop, made it a lot even more interesting, because it gave them the illusion that their futures had been put on pause, but in reality, they were struggling with things that they were kind of already destined to struggle with, regardless of whether the pandemic happened or not, which is oddly, it hits a little close to home for me. In my own relationship, there's this argument, and I've also seen it in a lot of other people's relationships as well, of kind of like, well, if the pandemic had never happened, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to where we currently are. Maybe things would have been different. But in reality, when you really look back on the relationships that you've had, or the things that you planned on doing, or whatever, when you look at those things, it's almost like the seeds for the destruction that we're currently sitting in were already there. It took a pandemic to sort of accelerate a lot of that stuff. But I think those things were already destined to happen, and I felt that way for these kids. That I was like, that Will wondering, am I going to ever get out of here? Have I failed my parents? Am I think I've already failed my parents, and Sarah with the not getting into, feeling that she's never going to get into art school and all of those kinds of things, and feeling like this pandemic is just kind of like a holding pattern for us to examine where we could have been if we had done it right. But in reality, maybe those things would have never happened anyway. And it's kind of depressing, but it's also real. And I think that the game of Chicken isn't just about messing around. It's about seeing if anything in their lives can actually change. And the gut punch realization is, for some people, nothing ever does. I feel like, that was the big thing that I felt about the themes. I will also say this, and this is just a side thing before I jump into other questions. 'Cause one of the other things that really, really worked well in this, and this is, Charles, you can tell me if I was correct in this, or if I was just, being a pseudo intellectual.
If you can back up your theory, it's fine.
But the title of the story really hit me, because at first, when I first read it, I read this story 4 times.
Well,
I had to make sure that I got it. At least my perspective of it was at least somewhat valid. The title for me, at first I thought it was like, oh, this is a sign. It's it's a little thing. But then I started thinking about the reoccurring nature of the cars continuously coming around, and that the road is almost like the circular nature of fate. The thing that things just keep coming around, and it made me think that the caution is not so much a message to anybody, not the drivers, but it's a message to fate. It's a message that be careful. There are people, there are teenagers, there are kids in the road that are waiting and they're hoping for something, and I need you to be careful with them. And that's it. It was this. The notes that I had here is that it's not just about kids literally standing in the road. It's about youth itself being on collision course with life, fate, and harsh realities of the world. The phrasing of caution implies a warning, a plea, a recognition that these kids are fragile in ways that they don't even realize. And the world doesn't stop for people who aren't ready. The way you put it, be careful. There are kids in the road. Be careful with them. That sentiment takes the title from being just a simple phrase to being more of a haunting truth about growing up. And that's what it felt like to me. And it's the reason why I really love this story outside of all of that is the fact that this is a prime example to me of why stories are so fucking cool. Because the idea of you can tell really, really, really hard hitting things that say something in a very simple way. Because on the surface it does just seem like a bunch of kids playing chicken in the road. And a kid who's like kind of just trying to fucking figure out what the hell am I going to do with my life, and I've already failed before I've even gotten out of the gate, and life kind of sucks. And that's what it feels like on the surface, but when you just really look at it, it's like, no, this is actually a commentary on fate and how we have to recognize that we don't always have control over what's coming our way. But in essence, we do have control about how we react to it, and I think that within itself is kind of reflected within the other characters in the story, which we can talk about as well. A question I have for Charles, though, is there anything about the story you would change?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I could add something for the listeners about the title, because there is something actually interesting about this, is originally I think I called it the chicken game because it was going to be something. There was something more about that aspect of chicken that I thought that was in there. When I finished it, I changed it for two reasons. Reason number one, didn't fit the tone, didn't fit the point, so I had to go. Second point, it was a dumb title. Didn't work, didn't interest. It was like, I'm not going to read that story. You know when you're reading like a short story collection and you're reading the titles, you're like, nope, that one. So I was like, it has to be something more interesting. But I think your point is funny because the idea was it was a play on that sign, caution, utility workers ahead, that kind of thing. So it was kind of a joke on that, hee hee ha ha. But it is an interesting point that you bring that up of what you said, because I think it was one of those, I kind of imagined someone seeing a sign driving down the road going, what the hell does that mean? But it was about how the drivers could hit children. That sense of if they don't pay attention, they're going to hit. And the reason I bring this up is I'm very, very, very fascinated, very attached with a lot of my ideas. Not as much anymore, but it's still relevant, of the way we build children up to tear them down. It is once I was like 22, 23, and I figured out how the world had to design to screw me over, I became very interested in that topic. And the reason I bring this up is you're probably right, Jared, it was subconscious, which is to say to writers, your subconscious probably has so much more to say. Go with what you're doing and start to pick up the pieces later. Because your subconscious probably has a hell of a lot to say that you're not quite picking up on. But to the question of why I would change it. So I will say, full transparency, I tried to get this published in 2 other magazines, and they said go to hell, which is, great. But if I want to take the pandemic element out because I think it somewhat dates it. Now, granted, if you read the details, it's actually way worse than COVID. The numbers aren't accurate. The numbers are higher and worse. But I added it at the time because I knew that this was going to be a big thing. And I thought it'd be interesting to set it in a, not, it's not about 2020, but a similar vibe. But I just thought it'd be very interesting because it was like one of those like, you know, those old sci-fi 50s through 70s sci-fi stories where it's like the world is nuked, but you never really hear about it. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. I kind of feel maybe the pandemic element pigeonholes it into into a space where it's not quite as timeless. I'm not sure about that. Specifically though, when I was reading the story, because I haven't read it in a while, so I was reading the story, two things stood out to me. Thing number one, I think I would tighten a little bit of the characters to make them a little bit more, not interesting. I wouldn't necessarily add more to them per se, but I think I would, here's another example of writers, I would write them a little bit more like they were actually human beings instead of just throwaway characters for the short story collection kind of a thing. I wouldn't necessarily change anything of their telling, but I would, in my imagination, they would be real teenagers, which is something I've learned. So the thing is, I've become a much better writer than when I wrote this, and I've learned that even in the shorts, because you know short stories, you know, there's a bazillion short stories you've read, and they're like, his name was Alejandro, and you're like, no, it's just blank character. You deserve your name if you're interesting enough for me to remember you as a character. But I've realized, looking through this as a writer, I think you have to really believe they're human beings. You can't do that to the characters, even if it's a short story. Mainly, though, it was the technical execution that was driving me nuts reading this. There's one specific thing, one specific line, and this is a really important reason. I have to... Okay, yeah. Prison-styled activity schedule. And I'm like... I was like, no one thinks like that. There's only one person who thinks like that. Me. And I was looking through... So the story, I think, is fine. There comes a point where if enough time has passed and you're fine enough with the story, you just go, there's the story, that's what it is, take it or leave it, whatever, you know, it is going to be what it is, who cares. But that was the technical element. I was looking at this and I was like, oh, that's why those two magazines definitely didn't publish the story, because there's a lot of technical messiness to this. And I think I would change it on the technical presentation to be a little bit more like a real teenager sounds. And the reason I bring this up is that I think when you're writing a draft and you don't quite know what you're doing, you kind of just say the words that come to your mind, the way you write a story. And that's fine. And sometimes you get some really good ideas. For example, when I was reading it, I liked one of the things where it's like, oh, they laugh that the car goes by, but I imagine that my spine is breaking. That was me. That was my kind of imagination. That's how I would describe the scene. So I'm like, that works. But I think we as people don't write often. We don't write, at least I don't, write the way a story is really told. So a teenager doesn't say prison-styled activities skit. No one talks like that. Those little technical elements I would shift into, say, let me look at the sentence again. I would say, I worried about tomorrow's schedule, prison schedule. I would just say prison schedule. I wouldn't say styled activity. You know, that's too technical. You can just say prison schedule. That's not precisely what I would do, but off the top of my head, that's what I would do. Of just kind of changing a little bit of the technical language to make it a little bit more smoother, a little bit more like a real teenager is talking a little bit, so that the audience, the readers, don't think I'm writing it. Because I think that's another thing, is that only I would say certain descriptions, and I go, that's not true. That's not how it would work. And I think you got to trick the audience to thinking, oh, the character is really narrating the story. but it's a second draft thing. So really, these aren't foundational issues. It was just a technical draft. And I went, ay, yo, they. You know, I have to take another draft of this and just, sew it a little bit back in.
I feel that.
Little details like that.
I feel that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into this Spark method, which is our new thing where we kind of go over the story, ask some questions, see where everybody stands with it, and go from there. So the Spark, S-P-A-R-K, everybody knows how to spell Spark, hopefully. And so Spark, so that's the setup, progress, attachment, resonance, and the killer moment. So for our setup, the first question I want to ask, and I guess this is more for Jaylon. Charles, you can definitely jump in if you have a thought. But I guess in the general sense of the way, since this is our maiden voyage, in the future when it'll be us three on this side of the table, even though we're not together, us three on the side of the table and the other person on the other side, we'll all be taking a stab at where we stand on it. But since Charles is the subject of our podcast today, it'll mostly be me and Jaylon going at it about this. So, Jaylon, do you feel that the story started off strong?
I would say yes, because the first sentence definitely hooked me. It gave me the setting, the tone, and it was interesting. So saying time has no meaning under quarantine, so I want to say we made up the game earlier this week. Immediately I get the feel of the way, the tone and the theme of this story. We have the setting. I immediately remember quarantine, so I know what that feels like. And then the time has no meaning obviously contributes to what an interesting theme and tone it is. And then mentioning something that you haven't explained yet draws a lot of intrigue and makes people want to keep reading. We often say that like the first sentence just convinces people to read the second sentence. That's something that's very common in copywriting especially. But as long as your first sentence convinces people to read your second sentence, English, then you can keep going throughout the entire story and you've got someone hooked. So I definitely say it starts out strong. That said, maybe this is more technical things that we'll talk about later, but there were a couple times where I was confused. I had to reread things. And I want to say that it happened within this first paragraph as well, but it mostly had to do with the tense that the writing was in. So I think that if the tenses were clearer, then I would have been able to follow the randomness more seamlessly and get immersed in the literary style as opposed to having to reread to make sure that I was understanding what was happening.
Yeah, I've picked up on that lately, and I've been told that where it's like I really have a problem with tense. Sometimes I'm better at it, but tense is an issue. And the reason I bring that up is that it's okay to screw up on tense. Is what I'm trying to say.
It is something that can be fixed.
Yes, and it's more common than you might think. Jaylon will tell you that my stuff, it happens all the time. I'll just randomly see a note. Is this supposed to be past or present? And I'm like, damn it. So it happens. It's totally fine. So I agree. I will say, here's what I will say. I think that the opening or the hook, whatever you want to call it, I thought it was okay. I think that it could have been stronger. The reason why I say that is I did like the time has no meaning under quarantine. However, again, I'm going to refer to my notes just because it's easier. But I didn't feel like it was a thing that grabbed me by the throat in the first line that I would have liked it to. I do like I said, I do like the idea of time having no meaning. I think that's a solid thing. But I think that the real hook of this whole story is the game itself. And that doesn't really, in full, the game doesn't really show up until a few lines later, or a bit later. I think that it could be even stronger if you put us right in the action from the beginning. Something as simple as, Gus didn't really Jose never flinched when the car was barreling at him, or something like that, that sort of throws us right in the middle of it. And because if I read that, I'm like, well, why the hell is Jose in the middle of the road with a car barreling at him, and why is that the first thing that I'm reading right now? And it doesn't strike me. It's not as poetic as Time Means Nothing, but it is strong enough to make a person say, well, shit, I kind of got to figure out what's going on next. So that is how I would do it, or just a way that we could punch it up a little bit, I think. I also think, yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it as far as the opening goes. I think that's the only thing I would do differently about it.
And I would add to that, that's a very interesting point. And I would add to that for listeners that perhaps your reaction would be, if you're in my position where it's like, no, I specifically chose the line. And that's fine, because let's be honest, we all hate the editing. We hate it. Mm-hmm. It's not fair. Right. I will say this, though, and this is coming from someone who's edited a lot of his own stuff and realizing you don't need this, you don't need that. Unless you truly can write a thesis paper on a specific line, on a specific point, a lot of these changes aren't really going to matter. And I mean that in the same way that if we go with Jared's point, it's going to take a little bit of work of restructuring, which is fine, that's going to happen. It doesn't change the essence of the story. So anything of not trust the editor because the editor is God per se. We don't, no one is above anyone here. It's a partnership. Yep. But I will say as a comfort, Jared's recommendation doesn't change the core of what I'm trying to say. So it's fine. It's totally fine. And I'm mocking myself, not you, listeners. I'm mocking myself. I think it's okay to make those changes. If there's something that you feel is affecting the theme of something, that is a conversation. But these little cosmetic changes, if your editor says that, it's probably a good idea, and it's gonna be okay. It'll be okay. I've learned this too myself. So
I'd also say this too, just for the for future guests as well as for the listeners themselves, is that always feel free to not fear. I'm so sorry. Always feel free. Always feel free to push back on things. If you think if it doesn't work for you, totally fine. It's your story. We're here to elevate your story. And so the operative word in that being yours. A lot of times, and I've learned this the hard way from going through the edits that we just finished doing with My Sister's Keeper, it's a lot of times the thing that I had to realize is that how somebody else perceives your story, sometimes it is important to kind of lean into it, because although we as the writer are so connected to it and it makes sense to us, that external person, they're reading it without any emotional attachment to it, without any feelings for it, and so the way that they're perceiving it is likely how the reader will perceive it as well. So although I won't say, tell the editor or tell your writing partner or whoever to fuck off, I will say that keep in mind that while you may push back, just always have that open mind that, hey, this might just be an objective perspective from somebody who's reading it who doesn't have all of the details about the story, or doesn't have the heart attached to it yet that I do. And that it's not an easy thing to do, but it's an important thing to do.
And I think those conversations lead to, from you and I, Jared, working with what we've done, compromise is a good idea. Not so that you avoid an argument or sleepless nights, but I think when you can find a compromise, you find something a little bit more interesting. It's kind of like, you have the sword, but you need the perfect sheath. Well, now you have the better sheath. So
absolutely.
To the point of compromise, because what I was going to say about this opening line is that it fits the genre, the theme of the story a little bit better than, say, an epic story where you need to be put immediately in the action in order to be hooked. So to that end, I don't disagree with if you just put the reader immediately in the action, they are going to be grabbed by the throat, they're going to be hooked, it's going to be strong. But I do like how the full circle of this story it starts with time has no meaning, there is no future. And it ends with time has no meaning, there is no future, to some sense. So having that kind of feel in the first paragraph, I think, is still important, even if you start with, like Jared said, Jose never flinched when a car was barreling at him. Just another random thought. This is also, every edit that is suggested also comes from a subjective point where, as editors, we may not have the full picture of what you were trying to communicate in your writing, and that just means that you need to be more clear about what was in your head but somehow didn't get onto the page. And that's where it's a conversation, where we'll ask questions. What did you mean by this? What were you trying to accomplish? And then we'll help you find a way to accomplish it.
Absolutely. Okay. So
Well
yeah,
said, Mini Moose. That's like just the advertising staple there, because that's my philosophy too. It's trying to get exactly to what your point
right.
is. Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, my feedback in general, and I think anybody's feedback really is oftentimes coming from the perspective of our understanding of the story, like you guys said, as it is, as well as our own. I also stand by the subjective statement of our own personal taste. Sometimes a lot of us like. Me personally, I'm a big fan of throw me in the middle of the action to start my story. Or start your story. I like it. It usually grabs me. I also have ADHD, so I need something that punches me in the mouth in order to actually get it. There are a lot of other people who are totally cool with being slow burn romanced into the story. So, make sure we connect with each other. We fully understand what each other is trying to go for, and then we can either meet in the middle and elevate it, or we can lean into what you wanted and just figure out a way to elevate that thing to where it needs to be. But next question: do we feel like the premise, the genre, and the world are clear from the jump?
I will say yes, because immediately the random train of thoughts that's being narrated immediately clues me into, oh, this is literary fiction. I can understand this is kind of weird, kind of feels like fever dream almost. That kind of feel gets me immersed in the story for what it is. And to that end, I'm not confused when we are following that random train of thought and things don't seem connected, but they are. So I will answer yes.
I will also answer yes to that. I think that it was very, very clear what the story was about. It was very, very clear what kind of world we were in, and even the tone also felt that way. To me, it really did feel like an A24 drama movie.
I feel like Suze from Gravity Falls. Yeah. Because I love it.
That's what it felt like to me, and it was the team can tell you guys. I literally messaged Charles and Jaylon in the group chat and was like, Charles, I need to make this into a short film because in my mind I see it so clearly as to what it could look like aesthetically, as well as just how I would shoot something like this, and it's just really, really good. It's really great. You did a really great job at that.
Sorry. I was going to say,
No.
Another note on the progression of it is because
Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
Don't talk about progression yet, because that's the next section. So
okay.
I don't want you to say it, and then like when we get to that part, you've already said the thing.
Okay,
so,
you're right.
all right. So
I would say too. I think it does its job, but I will say, I think the style has a little bit of a cheat, because a lot of these kinds of stories, you already know you're in the modern world. But I think, not to toot my own horn, because it's not about tooting my horn, but trying to say, I think using key phrases very quickly gets the job done. So when we say quarantine and we say the virus, and I think, does it say high school here? Okay, it doesn't say high school, but I do believe the term of high school is doing that. But I think keywords help very quickly for this kind of thing to work. But again, it's a little bit of a tricky situation, because when you're dealing with this kind of story, people already know you're mostly dealing in the real world, like contemporary theater or something. And short story, you gotta use bigger words. But I think even keywords help for any kind of format than more than just short stories.
I think prose too was the prose was really great. But specifically speaking about the pandemic, there were parts though that was, and this is more of a testament to the way that you wrote it, where I was confused about whether or not this was the pandemic, as in, is this COVID or is this going to be like a zombie virus type of thing that comes out of nowhere. And like I said, that's more of a, it's not a bad thing. It was just more of a test. It kept me engaged with it because I was trying to see where this was going. And I think that's a testament to the writing, but it's a message to the reader, to our writers as well that are watching, of remember to keep the reader asking questions. The right questions, because we hear that a lot. Keep the reader asking questions, but you want them to be asking the right questions, because if I'm busy figuring out why the hell did this happen on page 48, then I'm not reading. But if I'm like, oh, that's interesting, how does this turn out, then I'm asking the right questions. And so Charles did a really great job of getting me asking the right questions. Do we understand what the protagonist wants, even if it's subconsciously?
Yes, we understand that the protagonist just wants there to be a future.
I agree. I think wholeheartedly it was pretty clear to me exactly what the protagonist wants. And that's, again, a testament to Charles's writing, because I am incredibly slow sometimes when it comes to stuff like that, and my brain is just, I'm more of a visual learner, so reading sometimes can be a bit of a thing for me, and so abstract concepts like what does the protagonist actually want, and especially if it's like a subconscious thing that's not like he wants to, I don't know, steal the Ark of the Covenant, where it's like a very clear thing, it doesn't resonate, but it doesn't like register without like major brain power. This did not require that, and so even though it wasn't one of those plot device type of wants, it was really clear and good. So moving on to the P of our spark. Progression. Is the story moving forward with purpose?
This is where I was gonna say yes. I appreciate it, because when you have the premise of your story is this game of spicy chicken, it can feel more obvious that the tension is the tension of what's going to happen is, are they going to get hit by a car? But instead, it's what's going to happen if Will actually gets in the road, which keeps it focused on the protagonist and how life is affecting them, which is the theme of this story. So I feel like it does move forward with purpose, where we go from Will being more of a observer to then curious, not kind of morbidly curious, to actually getting in the road, and then what happens next. So I feel like it does move forward with purpose, and the plot it feels very tense, even though it's a short story, so there aren't very many plot points.
That makes sense. Okay, I agree. I'm no disagreement there. I felt like it did move forward. I think it's kind of baked into the story. I think that's why it works. It's an event of things that are happening. They're playing this game, and in essence, because of that, the story is it's almost like the story had Charles baked an engine into the story, and so it just kept running the entire time. And that's what you have to do as a writer, I think, to make it. I was told earlier today, to make sure that when we do this, we explain it clearly. And so what I mean by he put an engine in it, I mean that when you tell a story, sometimes we tell stories and the character themselves drives the story forward. The character's decisions are making the story. The character is making decisions that are moving the story forward. The character is choosing things are happening. Sometimes what ends up happening is we put an event in. So whether it be a bomb is going to go off in the Eiffel Tower, and so everything is moving around that. Everything is happening, or a war is happening, and there's this big backdrop of all this stuff that's going on, and so we need to get there. but the engine is the thing that ultimately moves the story forward. Charles has created the game as our engine. It's the thing that from the start, they're starting to play this game, to the end, they're done playing this game. Rather abruptly. But they're done playing this game, and that game is the thing that keeps the wheel spinning. And I feel like that's a great trick to use in your stories. Make sure you add something, an event, a thing that is going to ultimately propel the story forward. I feel, is that clear to you, Charles?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting because I again, I've gotten better, but for the longest time I had these great ideas, and it was like, now what, a-hole? It was like, that's what I ask myself. I'm like, great, genius, now what? Because that act two, and you're like, what do you do? But something I learned as an example for this one, it's like, okay, so you got these kids, they're bored, they have anxieties they're trying to work out, do this game. Okay, great, the game. And I'm like, that is so boring. Like, I can't write that. I'm like, what's the story there? But then I started thinking, what is the protagonist doing? And then I realized, I'm like, would I be playing this game? I'm like, no. I'd be sitting on the sidelines and watching. And then I thought, why is this character watching? Why are they not? And then I started thinking about myself. I'm like, I could feel people pressuring me. I could feel, I'm like, oh, I hate when people kind of push me forward. And that's why I wrote that bit, albeit not technically the way I would want it now, but why I wrote that bit of him is like, I hate people pushing me because I feel that way. And I started thinking about myself, and I said, there's the story. So that's why I let the other characters do their own thing, because I'm like, it's not about them playing the game. It's this character going to play the game. And that's how it became that structure of like, what is he thinking about the other characters, until we get to the point, what does he do when he gets to the game? And the reason I'm saying this for listeners is, if you can't think of something, just ask yourself questions, but have fun with it. So instead of going, my pitch is that the kids are playing a game, go play the game with the characters. Go play the game and figure out what happens next. And just daydream. Because you can figure it out. I'm honestly, like, I'm amazed sometimes where, like, I'll just make up something. I'm like, oh, I can make up something. And not like because I'm a genius. I'm not. It's not that. It's, if you just daydream and have fun, you can make up something just like you did as a little kid. Because you've done it. You've done this for years. It is baked into your DNA. So you can do it. You just gotta ask the right questions, I guess. Back to the point.
I agree.
I hope that made sense.
Yes.
So the other questions that are here, I feel like kind of overlap with what some of the answers we've already given. So I feel like we can move on to the A, which is attachment. Do we care about the characters? Did you care about the characters, Jalen?
So I had the main character, yes. And I did for the secondary characters to some extent. I felt like a couple of them confused me a little bit with the consistency. Like, for example, Sarah was more, again, this is more like, this would be a question I would bring to you to answer so that I could have more information to understand it better and then help you make it clearer from there. But when Sarah was the one to suggest, let's do it off of Gus's observation, I started questioning later on, learning more about her, like when she could think of nothing to say except, oh my God, in fear and anxiety. I started wondering why she would be the one to suggest, let's do it. So I would say my question would be, okay, going back, I also see how she does have that drive because she was the one to want to make a career out of her art. And that takes a lot of drive because it's something that is not easily done. So I see where she does have that kind of initiative, but what made her say, let's try this game in real life, let's put this dangerous assumption to the test?
And I will be completely transparent for listeners, because it is a-okay. I will tell you this, couldn't figure it out myself. I ran out of gas. And that's totally fine. That is totally fine because then we have you to figure out how can we plus it. What does plussing mean? Done. So plussing is an old term that is attributed to Disney storyboard meetings way back in the day. This is an old Walt era thing. I don't know if he did it, and I don't know if some other studio did it, but I know this is where it's popularized. Where they would take a scene and they'd say, how can we make this a little bit better? What's a little tweak, a little bit of spice here and there to make that scene just a little bit better? You plus it. So to that end, that's a great point about let's do it. And my answer is I ran out of gas. It never to make the characters. This goes back to what I said about I didn't see them as more than just placeholders, and that was wrong on my part, which is something I would rewrite and make better. Second point, frankly, I didn't even pick up on that idea. So to that end, it goes back to well, Jared doesn't get this because he hasn't seen Atlantis yet. But Jane Long get it. In Atlantis, where he goes, not in Ireland, but in Iceland. Same thing. Change Sarah. Jose says it. Done. Or, if you want to make it a little bit tougher, we could find a way. And maybe Sarah doesn't say it. Or maybe she goes, I don't know. And then Jose says, so you can build off of these points. But that's a great observation because that's kind of what I was feeling too. I couldn't figure it out. And that's rereading it. I was like, these are not the most fantastic of teenagers. And that's an issue. So I'm glad you pointed out. That's a great observation.
Okay, so for me, I also liked Will. And I liked Will because, we spend all the time in Will's head. So I related to him. I also had an issue with the side characters. My issue with the side characters was, and this would be, I have a slightly different method, I think, than Jaylon. Jaylon is far more experienced with helping people edit stuff than I do. So mine is usually from the perspective of I'm partnering with somebody on something, and so we're kind of figuring it out.
Well, same.
So for me, it's like, the question I guess I would ask is, well, less about that and more about how it came off to me. That's what I'll go with first. To me, it felt like the side characters felt like bloating around the story. Because I was so into what was going on with Will, and yes, I do understand. I don't think that the side characters didn't need to be there. They obviously did. But I also felt like I was so interested in what Will had to say that when he went off on those tangents about, like, Jose's life or Sarah's life, or even a little bit about Gus, it always felt like I knew it was fleshing out these characters, and I felt like that would work so well for me in a novel where I would have more time with these people, but because we had such a short period of time, it just felt like I didn't need to know it all. And so I guess the thing that I would have wondered was, would it be possible to streamline the characters' stuff? So, for example, Jose's background with Spanish and his family's expectations, which are interesting, but they don't directly impact the story's climax. So, instead of diving into all that, could we focus on how Jose reacts to the game itself? Does he ever hesitate? Does he push himself harder than anybody else? Keeping his characterization tied to the specific moment that we're in would have made me feel more connected to them as characters. I say that, and this is more relating to writers who are writing short stories as opposed to when you are writing a novel. Because in a novel, yes, we have all this time in the world to really dig into other characters and give it, because we're going to spend a lot of time with them. But since we only have this short period of time with this person in this short little window, I wonder if streamlining might have been an easier way to go about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, Sorry, I'll let you go first.
I was going to say, I think, first of all, great points. But I also think in rereading it, it answers the itch, or scratches the itch I couldn't figure out, which I think is, I was trying to do TV writing for film writing, is to use kind of a metaphorical point. And I think that's a really good point, because I think you can keep some of those bits there, but no flashback. So you could probably, so rewriting the Jose bit, You can have him say he does it, he's more determined, he's been thinking about this ever since his dad said, I'm not going to keep you here. Done. No little, I think I wrote like they went out to eat or something like that. No, don't need that TV flashback. Just something a little bit more condensed. Because I think you're right about it being bloated. I think that's a really good point. You finally scratched the itch that I've been having. So I agree there. Some more techno, not just technical restructuring, but also some content restructuring, which is another note to writers there too. Sometimes it really just is. Okay, this is a weird example. My mother does this weird thing with M&Ms. She likes to separate the M&M colors. So she goes all the green over here, all the blue over here, right? And I'm just like, blah, 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 because it's my favorite candy, so I don't care. I think sometimes literally all it is you just kind of have to rearrange those little letters in it. And it's going to take a lot of work. So what Jared just suggests is like, oh, we got to go in and delete some sentences and reorganize sentences. Oh, it's so hard. That's fine. It is hard, and it's okay to panic. But at the end of the day, it really is just A, B, C, D. That's all you need to do. So I agree. Great points, though, by the way.
Yes.
You were saying, Jenna?
To that end, practically, a way to make sure that your characters are streamlined and aren't just bloating a story with what feels like random facts is to make sure that every flashback, every bit of information comes from a present dialogue or action. So, for example, when someone says something, then that sparks Will's random train of thought to go back to the information that we need in order to understand what this character is illustrating to support the theme. So that is a practical way to do what Jared's saying in your own story, not just specifically with this.
That's a really good point, too, because I think, A, that's how people work, and that's the kind of story that this is. So to that end, I would say that how I originally did it and edited it and etc. Because it's not the first draft, by the way, listeners. This is like third draft, but it still needs an extra pair of eyes, clearly. But I think the way it was written comes across as kind of like noir. Yeah, back in the day, which is fine, but it's not the kind of story that's here versus a more realistic story like this is triggered by how we do our own lives, pretty much. That's a really great point. Boom, slam dunk. Those are great points, guys. I compliment the editorial skill here.
Very glad that it's helpful to what you were trying to write. Compliments to you for having such
Giving
a
us
strong
something to work with.
Yeah, having such a strong foundation.
Okay, so are we emotionally and intellectually invested in the story?
For sure.
Same.
Two thumbs up.
Yep. Mine. I'm cold, so you're getting one.
You said like intellectually.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's always kind of an issue I've always had with my work is kind of going like, you got great ideas, kiddo, but I hate the package. You know, the box sucks. The toy's great, but by golly, that box is horrible. And I've struggled with that for a long time. So I think I don't really have too much to say on that because it is without getting too massive. But I would say just if you too approve of it, what I was doing here was basically understanding that what you're going through as a person is philosophical conversation. When characters go, who am I? What am I? That is drama. That's not something for the thinker statue to go like this. That is drama. I don't know if you two approve of it, so I guess there is some goodness to it. But that would be my recommendation for other people, because I struggle with that.
I think that's normal. I just want to say that before I jump to the next question. That's completely normal because I feel the same way. I feel like I have the most brilliant ideas in the history of brilliant ideas with kick-ass stuff, but then the execution is like, you know, it's like that picture of like in your mind, it's like this masterpiece of a painting, but then the actual execution is like scribbling all over the thing. And it's like, that's what I feel like. It's like, oh yes, this is going to be so good. Like people are going to buy this. They're going to love it. They're going to fucking make book talks about me. It's going to be amazing. And then it's like, he bought the cat. And it's like, what the fuck is this? And so totally get it. Completely normal. Don't worry. You're doing okay. It's why we have editors and folks like us who can help to get it from to something incredible, to get the thing that's in here out here. And a lot of times, as weird as it is, you're the one that came up with it, but sometimes it does take a person outside of yourself to help you get it to what's in here. That's in writing, that's in prose, that's also in filmmaking. It's why filmmaking works the ways that it does. Does the story build a connection through voice, vulnerability, or depth?
There is definitely vulnerability and depth, and there is connection. Going back to, it started reminding me of existential thoughts that I had at this age. So there's obviously that connection there, even when it's not in the context of a pandemic. This is the universal truth that all humans face.
We talk about that a lot.
Yeah. Yep.
Universal truths. Yeah, I agree. I will say this, Charles, and this is something that needs to be said to Charles. Charles did something in this, and for other writers, I want you to do it with caution. If it works for you, give it a shot. But Charles did something in this that does not usually go very well, but he did it really well.
Didn't know where that sentence was going.
That's how you build suspense, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, a lot of times writers will put so much of themselves into a story, and you can literally read it and I know who wrote this. That's called voice to an extent, but also sometimes there's personality. There's personality, there's a person's insecurities, there's a person's doubts and fears, and all of that gets poured into the story, and you can literally read it off the page. A lot of times this happens for writers who are newer than for people who have been doing it for a really long time. Charles, when I read this, for a large chunk of this, I thought, we told Charles fiction. Is this a journal entry? Is this a biography? An autobiography type of moment? Because I really felt like Will, in a lot of ways, not the Charles that I know today, but I could see that the Charles of a younger age feeling this way. And I was like, oh, is this Charles just bleeding on the page for me? And he was. And it worked. Because I connected with Will because it came from a real place. So when you talk about the anxiety with the driving and all of that, and your the way that you describe cars as predators and all of that, just it was like, oh no, this is Will is a person. Will is a person, and not only is he a person, he's a person I know, and I liked it. Again, it's not something that is done well by everyone. Sometimes it becomes a little bit of a pity party, and then it becomes like a major downer, and nobody wants to read it. But if it's done well, and I honestly, this is one of those rare moments where I'm going to tell you, complete transparency, I don't know how to fix it so that it's not. I haven't figured that part out yet. But I can tell you that if you feel like you can do it, if you feel like you can put your voice into a story and speak directly from the soul, do it. The whole purpose of having editors is they'll probably tell you this is some mopey shit that, I don't know. But for the most part, I want to say that when you talk about building a connection, Charles, you didn't just build a connection between me and Will, you built a connection between me and you. And, I was, side note, because I don't want this to turn into a Let's Talk Stories podcast where we're here for 2 hours. But,
2 hours?
Yeah, I know, right? Where we turned to half a season of a Netflix show. But I think I was reading this book called How to Read a Book, which is, it's funny, but it's called How to Read a Book, and it's all about how to analytically break down and understand stories and read them, whether they be nonfiction or whatever. But there was this metaphor in it that has stuck with me since I read it, and it's that writing and the writer and the reader have this relationship that is similar to baseball in the sense that the writer is the pitcher and the reader is the catcher, and that ultimately the catcher's job is to be able to catch any manner of ball that the pitcher throws. I'm not a huge baseball fan, so Charles will correct me if I'm wrong here, but whether it be a knuckleball, a curveball, a speed, a fastball, whatever.
Slider, dear. Slider.
Slider, sorry, thank you. A catcher will catch that ball no matter what. But the pitcher and the catcher have to have such a relationship with one another that they both understand that when I'm throwing, you're gonna get it. It's for the safety of the catcher as well as for just the overall advancement of the team, right? So that same relationship is what needs to be developed with the writer and the reader. When the writer throws something out and the reader doesn't get it, that relationship with the writer and the reader is not clear. It's not there. We don't connect. It's either I don't understand where you're coming from, I don't understand what you're trying to say, or I just don't understand you. And as a writer, your job is to ultimately not just make the reader understand what you're talking about, but understand you. Understand where you're coming from, your view on the world. Even if your main character is a Nazi and you yourself are not a Nazi, whatever the message you're trying to tell to the world says everything about you. This is why my war on mediocrity and my belief that all stories need to have meaning. I know that not a lot of people agree with that, but I do believe that every story needs to mean something for it to really matter. That's where it comes from, because what you were saying tells me how do I understand you. And what Charles did with this story is he helped me to understand him. And through that, I understood his character. And I understood the world that his character lived in. And it made me, although I didn't really want to live there, it definitely, because I already did, but it definitely made me get it. And so for that, I'm attached to it. So you nailed it. Great job.
If we have time, there are two things I'd add to that, which is, and I don't know if this is how I do it and this is how it works. I'm not sure, but I will say, when I was much younger, because I was 25-ish when I wrote this, but I'm talking when I was a teenager. I would have characters that were stand-ins for me, because honestly, sometimes there are short story writers where it's just the author. And you're like, that's fine. It's a good story, whatever. But sometimes I just go, it's annoying, right? The way I've put in my own feelings and thoughts and anxieties and angers and longings is I put them into the character, but I don't make the character me. And it took me a long time to figure that out. No one cares about me. They can care about a character. And I think the other thing I realized about that was, it was, instead of writing about my problems, I learned to give a character problems that I had, which is a different thing, because I was imagining if I was the reader or the audience member and I saw this character, could I connect to them? And the answer is yes, because we shared the same problems. So actually, another slight plug here, for Cosmos, Jared, you probably would pick up on this. A lot of what one of the major characters, Raja, suffers is me. But it's not the same thing, because we're not writing about me, we're writing about her. But we share a lot of the same things. And that's why I tried to keep that balance of trying to basically almost connect with myself through the character by not making about me, it's about them. We just share the same problems. The other point I would add to that as well is, if I can remember, because my brain is screwy Louie, I think I lost my point within there. So you only get 1 point. Audience members, oh thank God. you get the 1 point. But I think that's what I've that's what I was gonna say. The other, you lose. I do remember the point.
You didn't escape.
When you're writing stuff, it's totally fine to just vent about things, but I think the way that makes it work is when you personalize the venting. So when I was writing about my anxiety about cars, and maybe it does come across as poetic and, your mileage may vary, but I wasn't trying to be poetic. I was trying to really express how I felt because this was my personal feelings of that fear of if I got into an accident, this is what happened to my guts, how the sounds felt. You can make poetry or something poetic through just expressing how you feel. Because in reality, in the real world, you got to go, well, cars make me scared. And you have to call it a day because no one gives a crap about what else you say. But when you're writing, you can give that to the characters and go, I see the little teeny tiny details and they hurt and they scare me. And that's how you can make something a little bit more punchy. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I have learned, and maybe I'm crazy, I don't know, but this is what I've learned. Pull from yourself and offer rather than pull yourself and slap yourself on the page. That's what I've learned. Maybe it doesn't work and it might not work for you, etc., etc. But, if you didn't want my 2 cents, why are you listening to this? Oh, shh.
Okay, so moving into resonance, a lot of these we answered already, so I'll say, is there something sticking with us after reading? Did something stick with us? Shaylon, let us know.
I really love endings that are a little bit ambiguous. Because it does make it stick with you, because that question of what happens, that itch is never fully scratched. So it does stick with you because you're still meditating on it. You're still thinking, what if? There's closure, there's a conclusion, but there's still that what if that's there and making you still meditate on it. So the way that this story ended definitely made it stick with me, not just for everything that was said through the entire story that stuck with me, but because the ending literally kept me thinking.
Okay, so I disagree. I disagree about the ending, and I only disagree about the ending because I don't necessarily hate ambiguous endings. I do believe that the ending does work because it does reinforce the theme of sort of uncertainty and inevitability clashing against one another. I think that works fantastically. So I think ambiguous endings are great. Here is my problem with endings in general. One, I hate surprises and not knowing how things end. I will tell you, I think I've told both of you this at one point or another, but I am the type of individual who will go to a bookstore and before I buy a book, read the last page to find out how it ends before I buy it.
I do that too, which is why ambiguous endings are so good for me.
They're terrible for me because it's like if I don't know what's happened,
don't understand this.
Now, to be fair, my issue is purely about my need to control things and my abandonment issue and a whole lot of other trauma, and so it just leaks into everything else that I do. And reading is just
Barnes and Noble becomes an existential crisis.
Exactly. My whole life, everything about my life is an existential crisis. Which fork I'm going to use is an existential crisis for me.
Real.
So I trust me. I will point something out in my life and I will find a way to overthink it and try to figure it out and figure out how it connects to, Plato and Aristotle in some way, shape, or form. So, not that either one of them are necessarily existentialists, but I'm just saying. Overall, ambiguous endings don't necessarily destroy me on the inside, but they do sometimes make me go, ah! Specifically this story because there was a lot of foreshadowing. There felt like a lot of foreshadowing for how it was going to end. So emotionally, I got in the headspace, and this is more my fault than it is you as a writer, but in my headspace, I was like, this dude, he's dropping the breadcrumbs. This dude has got to get laid out. That just has to happen. That's the only way this could end. And then it was like, the way it ended was kind of like, did he actually get hit by a car, or did he just jump out of the way and land on his face? I don't know what happened. What is happening? And then it was just like a whole thing where I was just like, I had to sit by myself for a few minutes to to just sort of settle myself. I was like, fortunately, I do know the writer, so if I really, really, really want to know, I can just ask him. But, you know, yeah, I would say that. So I would say, ultimately, I don't think that the ending was terrible at all. I think the ending was great, and I think it lined up well with the themes that you were laying out. I do think that the emotional payoff that I was expecting, due to the fact of the foreshadowing that happened before it, did not happen. And that, at least it did not happen as clearly as I would have liked it to have happened. For other writers, I think this also boils down to taste. Writing itself is a subjective thing. So everybody's opinion will be different. This is why you will have unfortunately forums and Discord servers and all kinds of other stuff of people going back and forth about why an ending worked or did not work. But ultimately, it really just boils down to making sure that you fulfill the promise you make to the reader or viewer in the end. Charles did, in essence, thematically, keep his promise to me as a reader. Emotionally, he did not.
I will point this out, though. It still stuck with Jared.
Yes, that is true.
So
that
again,
is true.
this is where it's like it is a personal
on,
taste.
Yes.
This is a personal taste thing for sure, because it still did its job of sticking with you even though you didn't like it. And there's always going to be some people who don't like your stories. The same as in real life. There's going to be things that happen that we don't like, and we just have to accept them. But it still left an impact, which means that it still did its job.
Right. All press is good press, so to speak.
It's interesting, by the way, you bring that up, because I was reading it and I was like, I think, looking back on it, I'm somewhat annoyed with how it ended, because I think I was trying to emulate that high school, college assignment style of a short story, and it doesn't sit with me as well. I will say, thinking back to when I was doing it, I was like, I think the problem was I didn't want the poor kid to get hit. It just seemed wrong, for like everything wrong. But I was like, him jumping out of the way just seemed incorrect, and I generally couldn't quite figure it out, and I think that's why I sided with the way it ends of being ambiguous. Because I think honestly, I was trying to think of, like, if I can't figure out, maybe that is the point, that I can't figure it out, and stick with it. The reason I bring this up, though, is that I came into a similar problem with a prose outline for a one-shot comic book I'm working on, where I had this great premise, and I couldn't find an answer. I was like, there's no answer to this. But what I realized, I said, you know what? I think that could be the story. The story of the frustration of not knowing. Not like, I know the answer. It wasn't that, but that sense of the frustration that you have in the world when you don't get those answers, and you're just so angry because things don't make sense. And I was like, that seemed to be the way it is. And that, I felt, was a better story than this. I felt was more interesting than this. So what I'm trying to say is that I think if you go with your gut, I think you'll be okay. Versus this, I did go with my gut, but there was just a little teeny tiny whisper of, the literary people would do it this way. And I think that doesn't quite sit with me as well. So it doesn't, like, I agree with you, but it's at the same time, I'm like, nah, it doesn't, it feels like I jerked Jared around just a little bit because I didn't go with my gut. Versus the other story that I did go with my gut. So if Jared was mad about that, I'd be like, okay. So go with your gut, because you're gonna have to live with it in the end.
Yeah, that's a really good point. At the end of the day, make the story that you can live with. And I know that's going to be really, really hard, because you're going to get a lot of reviews. You're going to read, stay off Goodreads. You're going to get that. You're going to get your Amazon reviews. You're going to get people that are saying everything about your story. Some are going to be great and some are going to be terrible. But at the end of the day, no matter what they say, if you wrote the story that you are proud of, the story that you did everything that you wanted to do on the page, that is that's the story you needed to tell. And the rest of it will sort itself out, honestly. Yeah. So that was good. I would say I feel like the killer moments, the K part of our story, we've pretty much touched on what worked really well overall, the lines, the scenes, and all that. I think the only thing I would say in addition, no, I think I said everything that I wanted to say as regards to that goes. So overall, here I have some final thoughts that I'd like to say. I wrote them down, if you guys wouldn't mind.
Go for it.
Okay. So, Caution, Kids on the Road is a fantastic short story. It's got strong themes and a tight structure, an emotional undercurrent that really sticks with you. The biggest thing that holds it back to me was pacing in some areas, specifically with the bloating of the characters and some of the dialogue. And I think the only reason why the dialogue really bothered me was more about some of it. I didn't feel like I agree with Charles in this version. Some of it I feel like kids wouldn't talk like that, but also there were certain parts where it was like, because we were so wrapped up in Will's head, that the dialogue almost felt like kind of a afterthought, like it didn't really matter as much, because we were just so wrapped up in him that we didn't really get the zingers of dialogue that I would have liked to see. But that was about it. But overall, I think it is a really well-crafted piece. For Let's Fix Stories, this is a perfect example of how existential themes can be explored through high-concept premises. It also shows how strong symbolism, a compelling protagonist, and a sharp structure can elevate a story into something that actually sticks. So, yeah, if I were workshopping this and Charles had given it to me and said, hey, do something with it, I would say I would tighten up the hook. I would sharpen the dialogue. I would make Will's last moment hit like a little bit harder.
Harder's a good term.
Yeah, and the other thing, the only other thing I might change, and this is less about anything that Charles would have done, this is only personal preference, is I might have made them not teenagers and a little bit younger, only because, like, younger kids, only because I've always found it fascinating, the contrast between children and existential concepts. Maybe that's just me, because when I was a kid, I was actually quite the... I went through a lot of existential crises as a child. I was like, no, I'm not gonna say that because it's a terrible terrible comparison, because he's a horrible person. But I was about to say I was like Woody Allen as a kid, but I was like, no, I don't want to be Woody Allen in any way, shape, or form. But like I was just the way Woody Allen is in his movies, is how I was as a child. I was overthinking everything, and everything was, I was worried about what I was going to do when I was 40, when I was 10. This character Will resonated with me even as a child. But other than that, I think this is a legit story. And I think that with a few tweaks, it could be a next level story. So this was a great job, Charles. I think you did a wonderful job. Did anybody else have any final thoughts before we get out of here? We went over a little bit longer. In the future, I think it might be a little bit shorter, but nonetheless, it probably never will. So Jaylon's right. She said the quiet part. Well, she didn't really say the quiet part out loud, but she said it with her face.
For me personally, this is for listeners here. This is the first time I've really genuinely had something that I really worked on. Not an assignment, not a part of a class, not a part of a thing. Be critiqued by people that I actually respect, rather than, bleh. And I will say, if I was younger, it would still really kind of hurt. Like, I remember when I had my class when I was in college review my short film, and oh god, my professor, one of my mentors in college, made me go through the frickin' response sheet after sheet after sheet. It was just it was pain. I will say though, in this experience, because it's new to me, I understand myself more now that I'm older, which has nothing to do with writing, just has to do with yourself as a person. I understand myself better now as a person, so I'm able to listen to these with appreciation rather than having it have to be about critiquing myself as a person in my head through the story. So what I'm trying to say is, if you find good people, you will have a decent time, and not it won't hurt as much. Something there is kind of a, I won't give the full comparison because it's a little bit Stephen Kingy on this here, but there is a thing in Stephen King. There's a short story he did where a character is dying, and basically they realize something that happened to them in real life was way more painful than dying. So this is not the worst thing. If you can find good people, this is not the worst experience, and will actually might even make you feel a little better, like you're getting something off your chest. So have no fear. Caution, yeah, caution. That's fine. Nervousness, totally fine. But it's gonna be okay.
I'm very, very grateful that you let us critique this story and appreciate your thoughts and you in this way, because it did do something for my soul reading it. And even though there's always subjective and objective things to nitpick at, the core of a story it matters. And there's that kind of validation that you are saying something important. Let's help you say it in the best way so that other people can see how important it is. Which is why I appreciated the full circle ending, where as the readers, we were put into Will's shoes of the future is just gray. We don't know what happens, and it seems like there's nothing. So I did appreciate the full circle and the immersion of this story. So that's the killer moment that I will say really, really hit home for me.
Okay, great. Well, if you liked our critique and you want to have your story audited, have us take a look at it, see how we can take it to the next level, because I'm sure whatever you already have is fantastic, but we can make it way better. Make sure you submit. We will have in the show notes our link to go and submit your story, as well as if you're just like, no, I'm sold already, I want to connect with you guys, I want to work with you, take me from this first 3 or 4 pages and take me to the end of my story. Schedule yourself an actual consult, and we can get ourselves started and working on it for you. Thank you, though, for listening to Let's Fix Stories. We will be back next week. I believe we'll be back with another writer who has submitted the first few chapters of their novel.
Who boldly go. Compliments to this individual.
So we will be taking a look at that. I'm going to make sure you guys get that so we can review it. But either way, thank you for checking in. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you found some value. If you did, share this with your other writer friends, share it in your writers group, whatever. Just pass it along, pay it forward. Thank you, and see you next week.